clock on the wall tells us it's time for another episode of Learn, Teach, Lead, where we explore how educators, just like you, are using innovative instructional strategies, including how to leverage AI to improve teaching and learning.
Each week, we share real classroom stories, tools, and tips to help you save time, personalize instruction, and lead with confidence.
I'm Jeanine Nostrom, an elementary school principal.
And I'm Robyn D'Angelo, an elementary school teacher. Let's get started with today's Friday Debrief.
Okay, so we have a lot of wonderful people in the room with us today, Robyn. I'm so excited to have all of these Ridge Ranch teachers to help us unpack all the great work that we've been doing. But let's start off, as we always do on Friday, by talking about our fabulous moment of the week. And so, Robyn, why don't you get started, and then we'll introduce our guests with us today.
Absolutely. My fabulous moment of the week this week came during our theme day assembly, when my class worked as a team to share our marigold story. And they weren't just standing side by side on the stage. They were really lifting each other up and remembering their lines and encouraging, their nervous classmates. And that's what we think about when we think about teamwork. And this models marigold behavior that we want in our school community every day, which is to stand strong and be kind. And usually when we think about gather, because we've been talking about our gather for the last several weeks, with our GROW method, it connects to some sort of data that we look at and assess. However, looking at these students up there gathering together really reminded me of the importance that our students need to support each other, to gather together for a teamwork, for a purpose. And that's what they did. They gathered as role models, showing the school how kindness and encouragement can grow into a community. And it reminded me that my students learn when they gather together. And that's really when the real growth happens. So gathering moments like these remind us why this is such a purposeful and powerful process.
So, Robyn, as you were talking, it occurred to me that no one has any idea what the marigold story is. So maybe you could just give a brief synopsis of the marigold story.
Of course. The marigold story I share with my class. I started the year off because our theme this year at Ridge Ranch is Let's Get Growing. So I started my year off, of course, with my AI assistant story, the marigold story. And it was about how a marigold grows in a garden and why it's growing in a garden. Because marigolds we plant in our garden to be beautiful, to rise above the others, to keep all the negative bugs away, and to shine bright. And so I told my students this year, they need to be marigolds in our Ridge Ranch garden. And then we used ChatGPT to take my classroom story and turn it into the Miss Nostrom and the Ridge Ranch marigold story. And that's the one they presented to the school. So great trick of how, AI can be an assistant to us by personalizing our instruction.
Yeah, I thought that was a really clever way to use AI. A lot of times we have a school theme as teachers and we're not quite sure how to connect it. We're trying to pull together our curriculum and our SEL initiatives and, classroom management things. So that was a great way of doing that. So why don't we begin by introducing our wonderful guests who we have with us today?
Of course. Let's start with Mrs. Anna Maria Matrano, who is a wonderful third grade teacher here.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
And Mrs. Linda Pricken, who's also a wonderful third grade teacher at Ridge Ranch.
Hello.
And a repeat offender. She's been on before.
Mrs. Happy to be back again.
Of course, and we're happy to have you. Mrs. Lori Carrizzo, our expert guidance counselor.
Hello, everybody.
Miss Ellen Chapin, our wonderful math specialist.
Hi, everyone.
And another repeat offender, Miss Christine Cheramonti, who is our reading specialist.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
So we're really excited to have everyone with us today because the whole month of September, we spend watching kids and gathering information about them. And that's what Robyn and I have been focusing on when we get together in our little Friday debrief for the past few weeks. How do we really gather information about kids in the beginning of the year, get to know them quickly, get to know them well? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their own goals for themselves, considering student voice as well. And we've been talking a lot about that because in the coming weeks, we're going to try and put all of that information together to make personalized goals and personalized learning paths for students to design targeted instruction to help move them along. So we're really excited to have so many different voices with us today to just talk about how we can gather information about kids and put all of this together so we can make these informed instructional decisions. So I guess what we want to hear from all of you is how are you putting all the pieces together to get a complete picture of your students? Are there any assessments that you've been using in the first few weeks of school that you have found particularly helpful, or any innovative practices? AI driven or not, they don't have to be AI driven, but just any innovative practices that you've been doing to, get to know your kids better. We'd love to hear from you.
I think observation is huge for me. I know I was talking to Mrs. D'Angelo about how we gather all this information. We do a lot of assessments, quizzes, that pre-quizzes before they even enter the grade. But then what I'm really interested in is the why behind the grades. Sometimes they reflect what the child really knows, and sometimes it's just they're shy. But I think observation is huge. And I think things like just counting collections, for instance, like counting hundreds, tens, and ones in various ways, using unifix cubes. Manipulatives are a big thing, or using base 10 materials, a variety of materials. If someone is, I think, a little bit lower in their number sense, I might use unifix cubes to make groups of tens and hundreds and ones, and then have them label them. And the way they label them really informs me as far as like where their misconceptions are about their learning, how they're labeling it. Do they understand what place value is? Where are the gaps? So then I can really, I love to record whenever I can. Sometimes it's hard because you're getting things, but when you can record that, it's really valuable information. Sometimes it's hard to remember everything. And then I can build groups or create experiences that help them to work on those gaps. And I try to bridge the gap between what they know for the grade level from there and what they need to know developmentally, because sometimes it's not the same. So sometimes I have to dip a little bit lower and get them to know that, but still stay true to the curriculum and to the grade level, and help them to know as much as possible, but keep it providing those experiences with manipulatives, without manipulatives, so that and then also logs, reading logs, math logs sometimes, or reading logs, so they can explain their thinking. Then I can see how can they explain misconceptions. I can give them opportunities. Today, we've been working on time. So I said, this person thought that the time was 7 o'clock. Do you agree or disagree? Can you explain why? And they basically explain that, and their lack of ability to do that, or the use of how they use the math vocabulary, kind of tells me a lot. And then I can build from there. And then I can kind of do that throughout the year and see if they grew in their thinking, things like that.
Absolutely. And you've described such a detailed way of paying attention to kids, right? You're not only watching what they're doing, but trying to understand why they're doing it and how they're approaching problem solving. Do you ever find that you get lost in a sea of all of these random little notes about kids? And then you're kind of like, what am I supposed to do with all of this?
I know it. I do. But I think that when you're watching for those things and you're asking them questions, and then a lot of it becomes intuitive. The more you watch them, the more you interact with them, the more you see it. Even though you have all those notes, you kind of really get to know your kids better, I think.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to maybe not call you out, but Mrs. Carrizo, I know that you do a lot of observation, being the counselor at our school, and not so much running things through AI or using rubrics to score things, right? So I just wanted to kind of bring it out to you. Like, how do you use these observational skills to gather information on students when you're, when you're with them and teaching them?
Absolutely. I think we all know the basic premise that you have to Maslow before you bloom, right? So we want to make sure to kind of keep an eye out for any soft signs of children that are in distress, or children that might be, kind of like removed from situations. So that's what I tend to do. When the kids come to me, I'm really more or less just observing, their interactions with one another. I have the opportunity to seat them wherever I want to seat them. Everyone, I'll mix groups, or mid lesson I'll say, why don't you two switch, so just to kind of keep an eye out for their interactions with one another, and of course for affect as well, that I'm pretty in tune to children's affect, and I think that's a big part, and I know that all of our teachers do this amazingly. But again, just kind of keeping in tune when you're noticing that things might be a little off, or things are a little bit different. This year, I have to say, in the month that we've been in school, I've been pleasantly surprised, because sometimes when you carry, your preconceptions with you from the year before, and it's almost like you're expecting to see something and then you don't, that really is, I'm going to refer to it as growth. It could be, some sort of level of growth on the child's part. So anyway, I have the unique opportunity to be able to see all the children in the school and be able to see them, grow and mature and learn and interact with one another, through the continuum. So I'm very, very lucky in that respect.
And Mrs. Carrizo, there is a question that you always ask when you're gathering information, because I've sat in many meetings with you, and it's a question that I actually never really thought to ask, but now I ask it regularly, and that is, did you get enough sleep? Or how is your child sleeping? Or even asking the student, what time did you go to bed last night? Because especially at the elementary level, the amount of sleep that a child got, or if there's maybe guests visiting in the home, or a new baby is coming, or just the many things that could happen in a child's life can definitely, that's all part of the kid watching that we need to take into consideration when we're gathering information about our learners. So great, thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
that. Does anyone else want to share some assessment practices that you've been using, that you've been finding helpful, or some tips or tricks? Go ahead, Ms. Sharmanti.
Hello. One other tool I enjoy using at the beginning of the year is a reading inventory that I created. And it allows me to interview each one of my readers one-on-one, and to get to know them on a more personal level, because I'll ask about what hobbies they have, what do they enjoy doing in their free time, but then also about them as readers and writers. And it's so important when using inventories not to use questions that are very leading, or that go right to a one or two-word answer. For example, instead of asking them, do you like reading or do you like writing? I ask them, how does reading make you feel? And how does writing make you feel? And that provides me with a lot more information. This year, one of my fourth graders, who is brand new to our school, so I don't have a lot of information about him from previous years, answered, how does reading make you feel? In a very unique way. He started by saying it makes him feel anxious. And then he added, when I asked him, oh, why? He said, well, just at the beginning. Then when I'm into it, I really enjoy it. And then at the end, I'm frustrated. So I said, oh, why do your feelings change from anxious to a positive feeling and then back to a negative feeling? He says, oh, well, at the end, I'm frustrated because I don't want to stop. So I said, wow, that's not a bad reason to be frustrated about reading. Actually, you've got 2 positives compared to 1 negative. So that's very, very positive. So then I was able to, kind of consult with him and share with him that the next time you approach reading, when you get those butterflies at the beginning, instead of focusing on those butterflies, think about how at the end, you don't want to put the book down. So get started, because you want to have as much time as possible with this book. So the inventory really allows me to get to know them as a whole. And then one-on-one, after each question, to just kind of guide them, if they need some help in an area, and, just to praise them on what they're doing well, and, use it for the rest of the year to inform my instruction.
And that inventory you give one-on-one, like an interview, or you give it to the student to complete and then you circle back to them?
So I do the inventory one-on-one. And the reason why is because I use it from 1st through 4th grade. And I don't want their writing abilities to inhibit how much they answer. And because then I'm able to do follow-up questions right in the moment.
Right. That's great. Thank you. Does anyone else
So,
want to share some assessments? Go ahead. Sorry,
Ms. Sostrom, if I could just thank Ms. Tremonti for consistently supporting feelings vocabulary. Thank you, Ms. Tremonti.
Yes, exactly.
You're welcome.
And I was going to say, we talk a lot about, and we collect a lot of data, right? Between DIBELS and EARLs and pre-assessment tests and post-assessment tests and regular assessment tests, like we're constantly collecting data. But, we also, the most important data that we collect, especially in the beginning of the year, is the one that we observe. Mm-hmm. Getting to know that student, because building that relationship as a teacher with that student is priceless for the rest of the year. And I feel like doing that and observing them and watching them grow and asking them those important questions, like Christine mentioned, that's where we start off, and then it'll fall into place. If we're missing that piece, that's a huge piece to the puzzle.
Absolutely. 100%. That relationship building is super important, and those inventories are a great way to do that. Ms. Chapin, did you have something you wanted to share?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So going along with the inventory, we also use the ECAMs, which is, again, an interview-based style that's typically kindergarten through 2nd grade. And I love these interviews because it does give you that one-on-one time to just chat with students, and with guiding questions that gives you kind of a scope and sequence on where they fall in regards to their counting and their numeration. And while you're doing these interviews, they are descriptive. So you're writing down what the student is saying in response to that. And it reveals a lot of misconceptions that they might have. And it kind of targets exactly where your strategy-based instruction should begin. And that's a valuable resource that I think that we're utilizing really well, because even with just a couple of interventions, a couple times meeting with those kids, you can really fill in a lot of gaps in that way of just, okay, this is an area we might have not had exposure to yet. And you give them a couple lessons, you give them that direct instruction, you let them try it out. And then afterwards, they're able to apply that strategy. And what I'm finding is that each time that we're utilizing this, this inventory again and again, it really defines and makes our instruction really individualized. Yeah. And so I think that that's been so helpful for our students.
Absolutely. And it is time well spent, sitting one-to-one with students. You get so much information because you can ask those follow-up questions and take those anecdotal notes as they're working. So I agree 100%. Ms. Pricken, did you have anything you wanted to share?
Yeah, just sitting and listening to what everybody said, like Robyn said, everything that we are doing in this first month of school is just so impactful, because we're getting to know the students on a personal level, and we're doing all these different assessments that are normed so we know where they fall amongst their peers. But I think a lot of conversations that we've had since this AI initiative is, what about the personal aspect of it all? You know, AI doesn't know each one of our students, and this is just a perfect explanation of that's where it comes from, is from us. So we are using all of this data to drive our instruction, and using all of the assessments that we have and the norms, and you know, this is what they scored, so this is where we should go to. But while taking that into consideration, you also have to take into consideration how your students are doing socially and emotionally. And I think that you having the power move on the morning announcements every morning has really driven to them that we have to focus on our growth mindset and making sure that we have this positive self-talk. Even today, one of my most anxious students, she was asking if it was the end of the day. And I said, well, it can't be the end of the day yet. And she goes, well, why not? I said, because you're not ready to go. And she goes, no, I'm not ready to go yet.
I love that.
And then she took out all of her things and she was like, okay, I'm ready to go now. So it's just that small vocabulary that we've been incorporating is really helpful. And I think that's the personal aspect that a lot of people question when it comes to collecting data. You know, we still get to know them. They're still little minds just growing and little people growing. So it's important to take their hearts into consideration as well.
Yes, 100%. I agree with that wholeheartedly. You know, I'm a huge fan of AI, and I'm actually going to segue into how we can use some of these notes that we've taken and leverage AI to help us. But the bottom line is, there are things that only teachers can do. Only teachers can notice when a kid looks sad. A computer can't do that. Only teachers can, in the moment, ask that follow-up question, you know, in response to a student saying that they're anxious when they first start reading, but they, you know, their feelings change as they go along. So without that, the thoughtful data collection done by thoughtful practitioners, the AI is essentially useless, right? You know, garbage in, garbage out. But on the flip side of that, I mean, most of the time it's only one teacher in the classroom, and you know, it's kind of like 24 against 1, right? So you've got all of these little bits of information that you've collected. It can be very overwhelming, you know. So now you're supposed to look for what's the next best thing to teach a student based on all this data that I've collected from all these different sources. But you also have to look across the whole class and look for trends. And that is something that AI does very well. So if you would like, I would love to be able to share with you something I've been playing around with, and maybe you could play with it in your classrooms and see if it works for you. I'm actually going to put in the chat here what I've attempted to do here, and maybe I'll share my screen in a moment, is figure out a way that we can take all these little bits of information and put it into AI in a way that it gives us back a student profile. And then the goal would be that we could take that profile and continually add to it, and it would develop along with the student. So I'm curious to see what you guys think of this, if you think it's worth the extra effort to do something like this, or if you feel like, no, this is not something I would need. I kind of do this on my own, or I've got my own internal system that helps me work it out. But what I did here, I don't know if you can see it, but what I did was I put basically the report card benchmarks. It's a second grader, so I took the report card benchmarks for reading, and I just literally went to our benchmark document on the website and I copied the benchmark. And then what I did was I put this prompt right here. I put, here are the reading report card benchmarks for grade 2. Wait for the next set of instructions. I like to paste the input when I'm using AI. So if you want to try this, you could copy that prompt and put it into either Gemini or Magic School or whatever you want. Just copy that along with the whole chart there, and you could stop at step 2. So I just simply dropped, you could see here is in the gray box, This long gray box, that was everything, that was all the report card benchmarks. And it doesn't look pretty, it doesn't need to. You just copy it, and I told it here are the benchmarks, wait for the next step. And now it is just down here waiting for the next set of instructions. So my next set of instructions are to have it take some of the data that I have on the student. So here are some notes on learner 44, wait for the next set of instructions. And I'm just going to copy that. Hopefully you can see me toggling back and forth.
We can.
Okay. And paste that in. And now I put in Linkit data. I put in the IRLA score, Independent Reading Level Assessment score. I put in the DIBELS. And then I also put in a student voice goal. In other words, what did the student tell me? When asked, the student told me, I want to get better at spelling words when I write stories. So I just put that in there. I'm sure you have much more data on students. And now it's saying, okay, got it. Let's wait for further instructions. So now this is the prompt that I am gearing up towards. This is the final goal. It's asking AI to create a one-page learner snapshot. It should say for a second grader. Using the following data and include the strengths using the, it should say the provided data, sorry. Using the provided data, include strengths, needs, and suggested goals. Keep it teacher and parent friendly. So I'm going to go ahead and add that into ChatGPT is what I'm, yep.
You still had it third grade, just so you know. It didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, you get the idea. It says third grade. It should say second grade. I could correct that. I'll actually correct it now. Oops. I meant second grade. Thank you for fixing that. Okay, and now it's going to go through. No problem. Here's a revised snapshot for a second grade learner. So it summarizes the data, and then it gives me a starting point. This student shows interest in writing stories, maybe reads with some success on an early second grade level with teacher support. And then it goes on to some of the needs. And then what I thought was interesting, it gave some suggested goals. So would I use this 100% with the student? I'm not sure. You know, I'd have to look it over and see, but it certainly gives you a starting point. And I thought if I were in the classroom and I had, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I had all of these little bits of notes, you know, about a student, everything from social and emotional to, you know, standardized test scores to anecdotal records, even taking snapshots of the student's work. And you upload all of that into one chat thread and ask it to create a one-page summary. That does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And then if you have many of these summaries, you can upload them and ask it to look for trends across your class. And that might be very helpful because it almost always, without asking, provides you with an additional prompt such as, would you like some follow-up lessons to target these skills? Or do you need some ideas? Now, these are things that skilled teachers do day in and day out. But, you know, sometimes we get stumped, or sometimes we just need like that creative partner. That's why it's so wonderful to plan with your colleagues, because when you have many heads together, you come up with other ideas. So anyway, I was playing around with that, and Robyn and I have been doing a little bit of this together, and we're finding it's giving us like some incredible aha moments, stuff we overlooked, stuff we didn't notice, stuff that we don't agree with, and we're like, yeah, no, nope, that's, you know, that's a suggestion, but it doesn't pertain to this student. So I'm just curious to hear your feedback on something like that. You don't have to agree that it would be helpful. Actually, welcome all perspectives on it, but I just want to know what you think.
It's a jump start. So as teachers, we can get to that end point, but it's on the laundry list of other things we need to do as well. So it just jump starts us to where we need to get to. And it kind of, I think, gives us a little bit of an ego boost ourselves. Sometimes we can feel a little overwhelmed with everything that we need to be doing and everything that is just looming over our heads. So by being able to collect that and have just a starting point to bounce ideas off of, if you don't always have your grade level partner there for you, it's amazing to just, you know, be able to start at step 5 instead of step 1 every single time.
And I'm thinking that, Lori, we did a lot of this when we did the high impact tutoring in a smaller version, right? So we, you know, really took these and took notes and observations, and we needed to find the gaps and how to get these students, you know, prepared for the next level. And that was on a smaller, much more disorganized way, and probably longer way than necessary. But I think it's fabulous. And can you imagine, as a teacher, I'm like imagining this, like the perfect world, right? If we had like a device in our classroom where we can kind of like take a picture of a student's work as they're working and say, okay, this is what they're doing. Where's the gap and where do we need to go next? Right away, boom, and then give them that suggestion. Although we can do that. But if you have this snapshot page of a student that, you know, that already has that data in there, just adding to that data continuously would give like an immediate response of the trends. Like we can see the observations, we can see the data, but the trends from first to second to third, like where do we need to meet them and what do we need to do to differentiate their instruction and, you know, target their instruction for them to make that progress.
So Anna Maria, I'm curious to hear what you think about this, because
Yes.
I know you're not like
no, but I have you. Well, it's funny when you last year when you mentioned some of this, I really like to write my report cards myself. But for the MTSS, I think I had 5 or 4 MTSS students last year. So I did use all of that data, and I put it in, and I was impressed with that. And I like the idea. I like the idea for a communication piece. Like if you're ever having to communicate it to someone, it really takes all of that information and synthesizes it in such a wonderfully organized and clear manner with like strengths, weaknesses. And I thought it was pretty impressive in that situation. It kind of saved me time in that situation. And I think adding little insights about the child in addition to that would be even make it more clear. I don't know. I mean, I guess putting the information in the beginning, all of that data, but I think to keep up with it throughout the year would be an extra thing to do. So we have so many things to do, but I think it's very valuable. I think it gives a very coherent, clear. I was always impressed last year with the AI the reports on their writing, you know, because it really is such a great piece, a tool for us to use to communicate with parents even. And you see the strengths and weaknesses so much more organized. So I do like it, you know, but I just think that some of the drawbacks would be having to go back in and try to we have so much data and then we have to spend the time on organizing the lessons and thinking about what would work for our students. It's just, we have a lot to do as teachers. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's valuable.
Yep.
So, you know, everybody likes to steal my thunder. Thanks, Mrs. Matrano. No, I'm kidding. No, but seriously, the second that I watched the one-page summary that you were able to generate from that data, my mind immediately went to the MTSS process. So just to echo what Mrs. Matrano is saying, while I, of course, fully respect and understand that a teacher may not be able to utilize this as a tool throughout the year, a teacher whose student is involved in the MTSS process, where we're monitoring goals every 6 weeks, even if you quote unquote, forget in between the 6 weeks, look at how valuable this tool can be if you just kind of need to extrapolate some data, put it into, a single source, I would add in the goal, given this data and this goal, what progress has the student made and what progress still needs to be done to be able to, as a classroom teacher, to be able to attend a meeting where there are parents in attendance and have that one-page document to be able to speak intelligibly about the progress and the progress tracking, I think would be incredibly invaluable. Like, I almost would love to have a test case, if you will, this year where we have a classroom teacher, Mrs. Matrano, just kidding, where we have a classroom teacher utilize that format, but utilize it every 6 weeks so that it's not too overwhelming. And then, report out on that data in the meeting. So I love that.
So just to go down the rabbit hole a little bit, a lot of times we are in MTSS meetings and the Google Meet is taking notes for us. So based on our conversation, we could run it through AI and ask it to create what's the next best goal for this student based on these meeting notes. And then we could compare that with the goal that we have come up with. One of my favorite things to do is argue with ChatGPT or Genesis. I love to argue with it, go back and forth. Are you really sure? Well, what about this and what about that? It's just such a great thought partner. And it's also truly satisfying when it says, oh, I stand corrected. So, sometimes it will admit that it's made a mistake, but just that process of being able to really talk something through or talk it over, just intriguing to me.
You bring up a very good point that maybe we can just kind of like try it out a little bit this year, and see, like, utilize that tool, between the recording and the goal setting, and then also see if we can ask a classroom teacher to pilot that idea and utilize that as a report.
Right, absolutely. So, well, the truth is, every time I get in a room with all you people, I am always smarter when the conversation is over. So I appreciate everyone's input today. And we're wrapping up our 4-week focus on the G in our acronym for GROW. G stood for gather. So in today's roundtable, we were reminding ourselves of the power of gathering information, how we listen to kids, how we learn from the information that they provide to us, and then how we synthesize all of that to help us make instructional decisions is just so important.
And as we move into the rest of the year, remember, growth starts with gather. And we all observe, we know, we hear students' voices, we use these assessments, and now we even have tools like AI, which can kind of put it all together for us and put it into practice in our classrooms so we can give every student the best chance to be successful in our class.
So, folks, that old clock on the wall tells us it's time to wrap up another episode of Learn, Teach, and Lead, our Friday debrief. We've shared a few lessons, unpacked a few stories, and maybe sparked a few new ideas for your classroom or your leadership journey. I want to thank all of you for joining us today.
And as always, we hope you'll take what you've learned, teach it forward, and lead with purpose. Thanks for spending part of your week with us. Thank you to our guests. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody. See you next time.